"Boy, could you grab us some coffee? Make yourself useful around here." The words hit me like a slap across the face. I'd been standing against the wall of the conference room for 20 minutes, watching as Terrence Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Financial Advisors, performed his carefully rehearsed song and dance for a group of potential investors. His eyes barely acknowledged my existence when he tossed the order my way, his attention quickly returning to his PowerPoint presentation about market opportunities and growth projections. The room was filled with his typical crowd, middle-aged, white men in expensive suits, nodding along and making occasional notes. I could feel their sidelong glances as I stood there in my perfectly tailored navy suit that had cost me $3,000. Not that anyone in this room would assume that. To them, I was just the help. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," I replied, with practiced politeness, even though my blood was boiling beneath my calm exterior. I caught the slight smirk from Bradley Cooper, Terrence's right-hand man, as I made my way toward the door. "And make it quick," Terrence added without turning around. "We have important matters to discuss." I stepped out into the hallway and let the door close behind me. Only then did I allow myself a genuine smile. If only they knew who they were talking to. If only they knew that Marcus Washington, the man they had just dismissed to fetch coffee, was actually the representative of Washington Capital Ventures, the firm with $5 million to invest. 3 weeks ago, I had received a call from an old college friend, James Patterson, who had started working at Mitchell Financial Advisors. "Marcus, man, you won't believe what's happening here," he had told me. "Terrence is cooking the books. He's showing fabricated returns to investors, while pocketing substantial fees. The whole operation is built on sand." I had made my fortune in tech startups before transitioning to investment management. My firm, Washington Capital Ventures, had been looking for opportunities in traditional financial services. Mitchell Financial had appeared promising on paper until James's call. "I need evidence," I had told James. "Hard proof I can verify. That's why I'm calling you," James had replied. "I've been gathering documentation for months. Discrepancies in financial statements, altered returns, everything. But I need someone with influence to do something about it. Someone he can't just fire and silence." And that's how our plan was born. I would pose as a new assistant, hired through a temp agency during their busy investment season. James would get me in, and I would verify his findings from the inside while simultaneously positioning my company as a potential investor. Terrence was desperate for new capital. James had confirmed that much, and would be eager to impress. A faceless investment firm that had expressed interest. What Terrence didn't know was that the face of that investment firm was currently on his way to fetch coffee. I returned to the conference room carrying a tray of coffee mugs. I placed them on the table, making sure to serve everyone with deferential politeness. When I reached Terrence, I accidentally on purpose spilled a few drops on the table near his presentation materials. "Sorry, sir," I said, quickly dabbing at the spill with a napkin. In that brief moment, I managed to glimpse his notes, specifically the projections he was planning to show next. Just as James had warned me, the numbers were wildly inflated compared to the actual figures I had seen in the company's internal documents. "Just be more careful," Terrence snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "Stand over there until we need you again." I nodded and retreated to my position against the wall where I continued to observe. The meeting dragged on for another hour, during which I was asked to refill coffee twice and fetch a new HDMI cable when the projector connection failed. Each menial task was delivered with the same dismissive tone, often accompanied by "boy" or "kid," despite the fact that I was only about 10 years younger than Terrence himself. As the meeting wound down, Terrence announced, "Well, gentlemen, I believe we've covered everything for today. Bradley will follow up with each of you regarding investment documentation. We expect a minimum buy-in of $1 million, but as I've demonstrated, the returns will be well worth it." The investors began gathering their things, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. I remained in position, invisible until needed. "When can we expect to meet with the representative from Washington Capital Ventures?" one of the investors asked. "I understand they're considering a significant investment." Terrence's face lit up at the mention. "Ah, yes. Their representative, Mr. Washington, will be joining us tomorrow for the final presentation. They're considering a $5 million investment, the largest single investment we've received to date." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. As the room cleared, leaving only Terrence and Bradley, I began collecting the empty coffee mugs. "Leave those," Bradley told me. "The cleaning staff will handle it. Just make sure. The conference room is booked for tomorrow's meeting with Washington Capital. Everything needs to be perfect." "Yes, sir," I replied, setting down the mugs I had collected. "Is there anything specific you need prepared for tomorrow's meeting?" Terrence glanced at me, seemingly surprised that I had the capacity for forward thinking. "Just make sure there's fresh coffee and water, and for God's sake, dress appropriately. No cheap suits when we have a $5 million investor in the room." I nodded, fighting back a smile as I looked down at my $3,000 custom suit. "I'll do my best, sir." After they left, I texted James, "Coffee boy duty complete. You were right about everything. The doctored projections, the inflated returns, it's all happening exactly as you said." James texted back almost immediately. "Did you get what you needed?" "Almost," I replied. "One more day. Tomorrow, Terrence Mitchell meets Marcus Washington of Washington Capital Ventures." "He's going to lose his mind," James responded, adding a laughing emoji. That evening, I returned to my hotel suite and spent hours reviewing the documents James had secretly provided me over the past 3 weeks. Balance sheets that didn't balance. Client returns that were mathematically impossible given the actual performance of their investment choices. Fee structures that quietly siphoned money from client accounts in ways that violated SEC regulations. I also placed a call to Maria Rodriguez, my assistant at Washington Capital Ventures. "Everything set for tomorrow?" I asked. "All ready," Maria confirmed. "The SEC contact is on standby, waiting for your signal, and Ryan Cooper from the Journal is ready for an exclusive if you decide to go public with this." "Perfect," I said. "And the other matter?" "The acquisition paperwork is prepared," Maria said. "If you decide that's the route you want to take, we can move immediately." I thanked her and hung up. Then I laid out my finest suit for tomorrow, a charcoal gray Tom Ford with subtle pinstripes, along with my favorite Patek Philippe watch. Terrence Mitchell wanted to impress Marcus Washington. I would make sure he got his wish. The next morning, I arrived at Mitchell Financial Advisors at 7:30, a full hour before most employees. Only the receptionist, Lisa, was at her desk. "You're here early," she remarked, surprised to see me. "Big day," I replied with a smile. "Mr. Mitchell has an important investor meeting." I headed straight to the conference room and began setting up. I arranged water bottles, notepads, and pens at each seat. I made sure the projector was working perfectly. And yes, I prepared a fresh pot of coffee, smiling at the irony. At 8:15, James arrived and found me in the conference room. "You ready for this?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "Born ready," I replied. "You have the final documentation?" James patted his messenger bag. "Everything you need. Financial statements, client complaints that were buried, emails discussing how to adjust the numbers. Terrence thinks I'm the loyal soldier, but I've been building this case for months." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why risk your job and reputation to expose him?" James's expression darkened. "My parents lost their retirement savings to a financial advisor who did exactly what Terrence is doing. By the time the fraud was discovered, it was too late for them to recover. Dad had to go back to work at 68. Mom's still working part-time at 70. I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch someone else do the same thing." I nodded, understanding completely. After today, Terrence Mitchell won't be doing this to anyone else. By 9 o'clock, the conference room began to fill with the same investors from yesterday, plus a few new faces. Terrence arrived last, making a grand entrance in what was clearly a new suit, his hair freshly cut, exuding confidence and charisma. "Gentlemen," he announced, "exciting day today. We're expecting Marcus Washington of Washington Capital Ventures to join us at 9:30. A $5 million investment would be transformative for our firm, allowing us to expand operations and increase returns for all our investors." He spotted me arranging the last few water bottles. "Everything ready?" he asked sharply. "Yes, sir," I replied. "Coffee is fresh, water is chilled, and all presentation materials are in place." "Good," he said, dismissing me with a wave. "Now make yourself scarce when Mr. Washington arrives. I don't want him distracted by staff." "Of course, sir," I said, suppressing a smile. 9:30 came and went. By 9:45, Terrence was checking his watch repeatedly, his confident facade beginning to crack. "Call Washington Capital," he instructed Bradley. "See if there's been some misunderstanding about the time or location." Bradley stepped out to make the call, returning a few minutes later with a confused expression. "Their receptionist says Mr. Washington left for our meeting over an hour ago. He should definitely be here by now." Terrence's face flushed with anger and anxiety. A $5 million investment slipping through his fingers would be catastrophic, especially given the firm's actual financial situation, which I now knew was far more precarious than anyone in that room suspected. At 10 o'clock, with tension thick in the air, I slipped out of the conference room and went to the men's room. I removed my assistant's ID badge and replaced it with my real one, a sleek, minimalist card identifying me as Marcus Washington, CEO, Washington Capital Ventures. I straightened my tie, checked my appearance in the mirror, and headed back toward the conference room. As I approached, I could hear Terrence attempting to smooth things over with the increasingly restless investors. "I'm sure there's just been some minor miscommunication," he was saying. "Mr. Washington is probably stuck in traffic. New York can be unpredictable." I walked into the conference room and headed straight for the empty chair at the head of the table, the one Terrence had obviously reserved for the important investor. "What do you think you're doing?" Terrence snapped as I pulled out the chair and sat down. I smiled politely at everyone around the table, then turned to Terrence. "I believe I'm sitting in my seat, Mr. Mitchell. This seat is reserved for Marcus Washington," Terrence said, his voice low and threatening. "Now get up and go wait outside until you're needed." "That won't be necessary," I replied calmly, placing my business card on the table and sliding it toward him. "I am Marcus Washington." The room fell silent as Terrence stared at my card, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, horror. This is some kind of joke," he stammered. "Not at all," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Capital Ventures. I've been evaluating your firm quite thoroughly over the past 3 weeks, and now I'd like to discuss where my company will be investing its $5 million. Bradley, who had been standing near the door, nearly dropped the tablet he was holding. The other investors were looking back and forth between Terrence and me, trying to make sense of what was happening. "You can't be," Terrence began. "But I am," I interrupted smoothly, "and I've learned quite a lot during my time as your— what did you call me? Ah yes, your boy. Your errand boy has been quite busy, Mr. Mitchell." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder of documents, copies of everything James had provided me. "Would you like to explain to everyone here why the returns you're promising don't match the actual performance of your investments? Or perhaps you'd like to discuss how client fees are being allocated." The blood drained from Terrence's face. He looked around the room, then back at me, realization dawning that he had been utterly and completely exposed. "I think we should discuss this privately," he said, his voice barely audible. "I disagree," I replied. "I think everyone in this room deserves to know exactly what they're investing in. Don't you, gentlemen?" For the next hour, I methodically laid out everything I had discovered: the fraudulent returns, the misappropriated fees, the shell companies Terrence had created to hide losses. With each revelation, the investors grew, more agitated, some making phone calls to their attorneys before I had even finished my presentation. Terrence attempted several times to interrupt, to offer explanations or excuses, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the end, he sat silent and defeated, while Bradley had quietly slipped out of the room entirely. "So, as you can see," I concluded, "Mitchell Financial Advisors is not a viable investment opportunity. In fact, it's likely that regulatory authorities will be quite interested in reviewing these findings." One of the investors, an older gentleman named Richard Harrison, spoke up. "Mr. Washington, I've had $3 million invested with this firm for over 5 years. Are you telling me my money is gone?" "Not necessarily," I replied. "That's actually what I'd like to discuss next." I laid out my proposition clearly. Washington Capital Ventures would acquire Mitchell Financial Advisors at a fair market value, which, given the circumstances, was far less than what Terrence had been hoping for. We would honor all legitimate client investments and work with regulatory authorities to ensure proper restitution where needed. Terrence would step down immediately and face whatever legal consequences resulted from the investigation. "You can't do this," Terrence protested weakly. "You can't just walk in here and take my company." "Actually, I can," I replied. "Your alternative is that I walk out of here and directly to the SEC with this documentation. Your choice." The decision didn't take long. Within hours, preliminary paperwork was signed. James was appointed interim manager of operations, responsible for preserving documents and cooperating with the upcoming audit. The investors, though shaken, were relieved to know that their funds hadn't completely vanished and that a reputable firm was stepping in to sort out the mess. As for Terrence, he signed the necessary documents with a trembling hand, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. When it was done, he stood up, straightened his expensive jacket, and walked toward the door with what little dignity he could muster. But I wasn't quite finished. "Mr. Mitchell," I called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. "You forgot something." He turned slowly, his expression a mixture of defeat and resignation. I gestured to the coffee pot in the corner of the room. "Would you mind?" "I take mine black." The room fell silent again, a different kind of silence this time. The investors watched, some uncomfortable, others with barely concealed satisfaction, as Terrence Mitchell, the man who had spent weeks treating me like a servant, hesitated for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked to the coffee pot, poured a cup, and brought it to me. "Thank you," I said, accepting the cup. "You're dismissed." The door closed behind him, and I turned back to the investors and the task at hand. "Now, gentlemen, let's discuss how we're going to fix this situation." The acquisition of Mitchell Financial Advisors was completed within 30 days. The SEC investigation resulted in charges against Terrence and several other executives, but thanks to our intervention, client funds were largely recovered. James was promoted to Chief Operations Officer of the new division, his integrity and courage recognized and rewarded. As for me, the experience reinforced something I had learned early in my career. Appearances and assumptions can be powerful tools, both for those who use them as weapons and for those who know how to turn them to their advantage. 3 months after the acquisition, I received a visitor at my Manhattan office. Lisa, the receptionist who had been the only person to consistently treat me with respect during my time undercover, had requested a meeting. "Mr. Washington," she said, looking nervous as she sat across from me. "I want to thank you for keeping me on during the transition. Many of us were worried about our jobs." "You earned it," I replied honestly, "and please, call me Marcus." She smiled, then hesitated before continuing. "There's something I think you should know. Something I noticed during your time at Mitchell." "What's that?" I asked, curious. "The day before you revealed yourself," she said, "I saw Bradley Cooper going through your personal belongings when you stepped away from your desk. He was looking at your phone. I thought it was strange, but I didn't say anything. I wonder now if he suspected something." I hadn't known this, and the information was illuminating. Bradley had disappeared shortly after the acquisition announcement, cleaned out his bank accounts, and hadn't been seen since. We'd assumed he was just trying to avoid legal consequences, but perhaps there was more to it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "That's very helpful information." After Lisa left, I called our security team and asked them to review our systems for any unauthorized access. It was mostly a precaution. What damage could Bradley really do now that the acquisition was complete? The answer came 2 days later when our head of cybersecurity reported that someone had attempted to access our client database using credentials. That had been deactivated, Bradley's old login information. The attempt had been blocked, but it confirmed my suspicion. Bradley was planning something. I immediately ordered a complete security audit and hired additional protection for our key systems and personnel. My instincts told me this wasn't over. 1 week later, I received an anonymous email with a single attachment, a photo of me entering my apartment building, clearly taken from across the street. The message was simple. "You took everything from us. Now we take everything from you." Rather than feeling threatened, I felt validated. Bradley hadn't run away. He was plotting revenge, and now I knew it for certain. I contacted the FBI, sharing everything I had about Bradley Cooper, including his apparent surveillance of me. They took the threat seriously, especially given the financial crimes already being investigated. For 2 tense weeks, nothing happened. Then, late one night, my security system alerted me to movement outside my apartment. The cameras showed a figure in dark clothing attempting to disable the lock on my front door. Police responded within minutes, and Bradley Cooper was arrested, caught red-handed with lock-picking tools and, most damning of all, a gun with the serial number filed off. The charges against him expanded from financial crimes to attempted, breaking and entering, possession of an illegal firearm, and criminal threatening. His bail was denied, and as he was led away in handcuffs, I felt the final piece of this saga fall into place. 6 months after my coffee-fetching days at Mitchell Financial Advisors, I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly performance of our new division. James had done an exceptional job rebuilding client trust, and we were seeing positive returns, real ones this time, across the portfolio. Maria knocked on my door, interrupting my review. "Your 3 o'clock is here," she announced. I looked up to see Richard Harrison, the investor who had been most concerned about his $3 million during that fateful meeting. "Richard," I greeted him, standing and extending my hand. "Good to see you." "Marcus," he replied, shaking my hand firmly. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to thank you personally. Your team has not only recovered my investment, but has actually produced the returns that Mitchell had only been pretending to deliver." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. "That's exactly what we aim to do." Richard hesitated, then added, "I also owe you an apology. That day, when you revealed yourself, I realized I had been in several meetings where Terrence treated you poorly, and I said nothing. I assumed you were just what he said you were." I smiled. "That was the point, Richard. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one no one is watching." "Indeed," Richard agreed. "A lesson I won't forget, and neither will anyone else who was there that day." He chuckled. "That coffee moment at the end. I've told that story at least a dozen times. The look on Terrence's face when you asked him to serve you." After Richard left, I stood by my office window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. I thought about Terrence Mitchell, currently awaiting trial, his reputation and company gone. I thought about Bradley Cooper, facing years in prison for financial crimes compounded by his ill-conceived revenge attempt. But mostly, I thought about that moment, that perfect, crystalline moment when I sat at the head of the table and watched understanding dawn on Terrence's face. "Great. Now let's discuss where my company will be investing its $5 million. In that moment, every coffee run, every boy and dismissive glance, every assumption based on nothing but the color of my skin, all of it had been worth it for the justice that followed. The real power, I had learned, isn't in making others feel small. It's in knowing exactly who you are, even when others fail to see it. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's in the perfect cup of coffee, served at precisely the right moment."